All right, let's go live. Let's go live and talk about this right now. Hope that you are doing well. God bless you. Hopefully all is going well with you and your family and things are going well with you. And I wanted to kind of come to you and talk a little bit about this idea of being made in the image of God. I've been thinking a lot about Kemetic religion and spirituality. And, religion is just a way to connect back to God. Let's think about that and kind of throw these things out the window and just understand it. It's just a way to connect back with God. And you guys know, if you've been following me or just listening to some of the videos and the contacts and things that I've been doing, that I talk a lot about Kemetic history. And I talk a lot about things with respect to, how things are moving forward and how we, can look and see, who the Kemetic people were, what the Kushite people were doing, things of that nature. But there's a lot more to what our ancestors were doing than just the fact of who they were, or just the fact that they were Black, or just the fact that they were doing magnificent, amazing things. The question is, how do we do them today? And if we understand what our ancestors were doing, Kemetic ancestors and ancestors throughout the globe, we understand that connection with God, that connection with spirituality is key, especially when you look at Africa. That idea of not being afraid to talk about God, that idea of not being afraid to be who you are, because in the meantime, as we have grown up, if you will, in this 21st century, and we are kind of moving into a technological age, in some ways, we are afraid to talk about our spirituality. We're afraid to talk about our connection with God, and we are definitely afraid to talk about our ancestors. We are afraid to talk about how our ancestors worshiped God, the manner in which they worshiped God, how they connected God. And that was the key to what made them do all the great things that they did. So I'm going to be talking about that today and talking about that more, because we shouldn't be ashamed to talk about it. And that's what made them great. So I wanted to talk about it, and I'm going to be sharing this resource right here. And this resource I'm going to be sharing is going to be available to those who are members on the channel. And I very much appreciate it. Thank you for being a member, and thank you for all that you. I'm going to be walking through this today, and I'll be putting the link in the member site, in the member part, in the member portion, where you can see and access this resource. I'm putting up a series of blogs where we talk about this, kind of mini courses, if you will. And this will be available to you as of day. But I want to kind of talk about it because I talk about it within the context of the land of Punt. So we know Tanacher, we know that the God's land was a land where they did pilgrimages. We know that the ancient Kemetic people, throughout the history of ancient Kemet, did pilgrimage to thank you so much for joining. God bless you. Thank you for those who are joining. They did pilgrimages to what we call the land of Punt, what was God's land. We call it Punt in God's land. These were not just trading expeditions. These were actual pilgrimages. These were ideas and places where they went in order to, and times when they went there in order to be able to get things for God, to be able to get things for the worship of God and for connecting with God. And as we think about that and we kind of jump into that whole idea of being able to connect with God, that whole idea of having your fundamental spirituality be able to take you through things and take you to places that you never thought you would go, or get through things you never thought you would get to. That's what it's all about. Whether we're talking about people like Harriet Tubman, or we're talking about Sojourner Truth, or what Frederick Douglass did, or what Queen Amenhotep, so what we did with Hatshepsut, or King Sahare, all the things that they did, all the people we mentioned in ancient Kemetic history and throughout history, we talk a lot about their spirituality and the context within which they did things. And I believe that if your way you connect to God, if your spirituality can't help you through the challenges that you're dealing with, then what is it for? And our ancestors used their connection and their ideas and their thoughts about God and their connection with God to do things that were amazing, to lay the foundation in the civilization. So I don't care if you're talking about the Olmecs, or you're talking about Kemetic, or you're talking about Kushite, you're going way, way back to the middle of Africa, and millions of years ago, where the human ancestors were there laying the foundations for what we would do later on, doing things that would pave the way of history. Our ancestors did amazing things. And the idea that you can connect to something greater than you, the idea that there's something that's beyond just what you're physically limited to, is what our ancestors were talking about. And that's the idea of the spirituality behind it. So as we get in and we talk about this resource, I'll kind of jump around a little bit and talk about just some of the aspects of how the Kemetic people looked at the land of Punt. And I was like, excuse me, my voice is a little dry. How they looked at the land of Punt, and how they considered themselves being a part of kind of inheriting this great spiritual congress, this great spiritual responsibility and purpose. Because part of the idea of seeing yourself in the image of God, part of the idea of seeing yourself as a reflection of God, doesn't allow you to put limits on you. It doesn't allow you to look at your life and to say, you know what, I have limits into what I can do. Obviously, we're not talking about whether or not you can do crazy, but thinking about the things that you face in your life, think about the things that God puts on your heart, that those things are actually possible, that those things are achievable. You don't allow yourself to put limits on you. The other thing you do is you begin to have purpose in your life. And I think about, the Nasupati, Sahare here, who we talk about. He was among the early people. You can go throughout all of Kemet's history. You think about whether you're talking about pre-dynastic or the Old Kingdom, the New Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, you can see them conducting pilgrimages. I mean, we should call them what they are, pilgrimages. It wasn't just expeditions. It wasn't just trade expeditions, as we like to call them. These were pilgrimages to a land that they call God's land, to an area where they believe, and they talked about Hatshepsut and they talk about Heteru being the mistress and the lord of Punt. These were places where this was a place where they had resources that were considered to be of the utmost importance, of the highest quality, in order to be able to serve God back in Kemet. So whether you were talking about looking at the aspect of God that's raw, you're talking about Amen, whatever it is you might be talking about, the idea that you went to get the best, the idea that you went to Punt, and then you went to get the best was what was significant about that. And as I mentioned, this resource is going to be made available as of the day to members. So you can go back as far as, this is one particular account of King Sahure sending a pilgrimage to Punt and getting resources, getting measurements of myrrh. And when you think about myrrh and frankincense and ebony and exotic animals and various types of incenses. This is incense. These are the types of things they got from the land of Punt. But it wasn't just that they were getting it from a far off place. They were getting it from a place where they believed that this was the holiest of holies. This was the highest quality of resources they could get in order to serve God with. No matter where they were looking at throughout history as they were doing it. And as we think about that and kind of put ourselves in that mindset, it starts to kind of beg the idea of what was the central theme as we look at this. So whether we're talking about the Middle Kingdom, and you can see various routes. This is an account of a gentleman who was an official during the 11th dynasty, and his account of being of the pass through this eastern part of the desert of ancient Kemet and travel south down to what will be the land of Punt, and returning safely from there and going through the desert, what they call the Red Land, going through that and making that trip. And whether you talk about this is a Nasupati, this is a ruler from the 12th dynasty. As you look at that, you start to see this incredible effort, right? This incredible effort to go to a place to get resources for God, to serve God. And one of the things that strikes me the most out of this, and you could read this if you were a part of our membership, you could read this. One of the things that strikes me the most is that the most significant and obviously most famous, expedition to Punt and pilgrimage to Punt was done by Hatshepsut. And it's documented amazingly in her temple. And you can see soldiers here on the journey to Punt, and soldiers that they were depicted in her temple. And one of the most famous part is talking about Punt. But what jumps out at me is this whole idea. This is the scene from the boat that was going to Punt and various things like that. What jumps out at me is the whole idea of what the king of Queen of Punt looked like. And this is an example, a depiction of Queen Tiye and her husband Peru, and they were the rulers of Punt. They were the rulers of Punt during the time when Ma'at Karal, when Hatshepsut sent her pilgrimage to Punt to get these resources, this incredible myrrh and incense and myrrh trees and all types of things to be used in the worship in order to create for God a Punt in Kemet. That was her goal, to create for our men a Punt in Kemet. And as we think about that, thank you so much for joining. God bless you. I appreciate it. As we think about that, that becomes a significant thing to stop and think about it. Here we're seeing some people from thousands of years ago from the land of Punt as depicted on the walls of Hatshepsut's temple. And as we see that, we start to say, okay, think about this for a second. That was an amazing trip, an amazing journey. And at no time in ancient Kemet's history, it's almost like when you think about hip hop and how people think about themselves. At no time in ancient Kemet's history did the ruler say, I'm not worthy of leadership, or maybe somebody else should lead, or maybe this thing that I'm about to do is very difficult for me to do, and maybe I should not do it, and things of that nature. You find them talking about themselves in very grandiose ways, that allows you to think about, perhaps when we think about the human being, that the human being itself is divine, that we should not limit ourselves to things that people say we can and cannot do. We should not limit ourselves to time, or limit ourselves to the challenges we face in life. If there's anything that we can overcome, if there's anything that we can do, that we can challenge ourselves with, that's the things we face in everyday life. And our spirituality and our connection with God should allow us to do that. And at the fundamental core of what that is, at the fundamental part of what that is in terms of our connection with God, is the idea that you're made in the image of God. If you don't think about anything else, and I'll be talking about this, if this helps you, I hope it does. If you can find friends that will talk more about it. But as we think about things that we're dealing with now, there are a lot of people, who are hungry. There are a lot of people who can't find ends meet. They can't make their ends meet. They can't find a way to maybe pay their bills. There are people who are going to have challenges with healthcare. The people who have all kinds of challenges, mental challenges, all kinds of things happening right now today who are finding it difficult to deal with it. And we have to be able to offer an answer better than just your ancestors were great. Your ancestors were great and you are too. Your ancestors were great and this is how. Your ancestors were great because of their spirituality, because they took the time to pour into themselves. They took the time to pour into their spirituality. They took the time to explore God. If there's one thing you see, one spiritual science that our ancestors looked at, it was the science of the soul, the science of the spirit, the idea of being able to look into who you are and what makes you tick, what makes you go and do something that seems incredible, what makes you do something beyond what you think you're able to do. That's really where their genius is. So whether you think it's building a pyramid or starting a civilization or having a long society that lasts for thousands of years or coming up and discovering all types of things, the gist of that is being able to see yourself doing something beyond what you thought you might be able to do. And that kind of gets to the point of being able to pour into yourself spiritually. And I'll be talking about this a lot. I'm going to try to come to you a lot with different aspects of it so that we can look at aspects of Kemetic deities, of ancient African deities, of even how we've applied it in America in recent times. How do we look at things? How are our ancestors able to change a land that hated them? To change a land that enslaved them? How were they able to fight for their own freedom? How were they able to make scientific discoveries and spiritual discoveries and have civilizations and family lines that lasted for thousands of years? How were they able to do those things and have a cohesiveness and togetherness that lasted for years and years? And the way they did it was they poured into their spirituality. And a fundamental aspect that before you can go almost anywhere, you have to start to think about, how do I view myself? And the idea of viewing yourself as being made in the image of God is incredible. And as you think about King Parahu and Queen Eti right here, you start to see an example of people who are looking and seeing themselves as being in the image of God. People who are seeing themselves and seeing the divinity in them. And as you start to think about that, we start to hone in on a couple things. I mean, I want to kind of pull in some of the things that Queen Hatshepsut talks about in a couple of her temples that I think drive home the whole message behind this. And I'll invite you to kind of read this as well by yourself. But I want to pull into something particular, not just in her particular temple, where there are magnificent things that are seen, that we show magnificent things that show the whole aspect of how they went to Punt, how they thought of themselves, how they move forward, how they address things, but really kind of drawing it down and getting down to this one particular passage that's in a different temple of hers, and it's in the temple of Ptahhotep. Now I'll show you right here as we kind of talk about it. She talks about a lot within the context of ancient Punt of doing things that God would have her to do. You know, I will cause you to know that which was commanded me, how God commanded me. I have hearkened to my father, that which he has commanded me, to establish for him a punt in his house, to plant the trees of God's land beside his temple in the garden. According to what he's commanded, it is done. And it is done in order to endow his offerings, what I owed to God. She's saying how man has commanded her to create a punt in God's land in Kemet. Very interesting, right? To create God's land punt in the land of Kemet. So you see them talking about an incredible place that has incredible significance to them, and being able to create that and recreate that in Punt. But not only does she talk about that, she goes on to say in a different temple where she talks about, I have made bright the truth which he loved. I know that he loves it and he lives by it. He's talking about that God lives by truth. It is my bread. I eat of his brightness. I am the likeness of his limb. I am one with him. She's saying, I have made bright truth, and I understand that God loves truth, talking about Ma'at, talking about truth, and that I live by it, and that I'm living by it, and that I am in the likeness of his limbs. I am one with God. He has begotten me to make strong his might on this land. Stop for a second and think about that. Imagine if you went to bed tonight with a meditation on your mind, saying to yourself that I love truth, that I am in the likeness of God, that I'm made, that my limbs, my very body, my very essence is one with God. and that God has made me in order to be able to make bright and strong his might in the land, that I have a purpose, that I'm made in God's image, and that I was made for a purpose. Imagine if you just went to bed thinking that. Imagine if that was what you took into your sleep, instead of football or basketball or soccer or whatever it is you may look, or TV or something on Netflix or whatever it might be. Instead of watching that, imagine if you took to bed just almost like a mantra, where you repeated for yourself, I'm made in the image of God. I'm one with God. My very limbs, my very body are made in, like, think about this now. And you probably know a lot about biology, things of that nature. When an egg is fertilized, it takes many different sperm to try to get to that one egg. And if one makes it, you can begin to have life develop. You begin to think that the odds and the chances and all that happened in order to make you was not something that was happenstance. It's not something that's unimportant. It's something that's significant. It's something that's divine. If you stop and just look at all the things that went into making you, all the billions and billions of years of history and billions of years of divineness and rightness went into making you. And that's a manifestation of who you are. You are a manifestation of all the things that came before you, all that God has put in, all that you're able to accomplish, all that you're able to see and imagine. That is you. You're a manifestation of that. And you were made for a purpose. You were made to advance God's purpose in some way. Just to go to bed thinking about that, just to have that in your mind, just to have that as your concept. Because when we think about people like Queen Hatshepsut and people that was their mantra. I mean, we can talk about a lot of things, but when we look at their temples, we look at the things that they built for eternity. When we look at the things that they left behind very significant spiritual offerings and spiritual gifts and spiritual demonstrations of what they believed and their connection with God. And imagine not having things stop you. Imagine meditating on that. Imagine having that as your central goal as to who you are and what you think about. So I'm going to challenge that today and ask you just to think about that. Think about yourself as being made in the likeness of God. Go to bed tonight thinking about that, having that on your heart and having it on your mind, and see what that does in your life as you develop. I'm gonna come back to you with more things in this whole line. I wanted to share that. I hope it's helpful. But I think we have to think about things that will help us move forward to address any challenge we may have in life. So God bless you. Thank you for joining me, and I'll talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.